So, there's no doubt that S.S. Rajamouli is one of the best action directors in India. And while his movies have gained universal acclaim for their execution of action scenes, I think there is one less skill of Rajamouli that is often overlooked that sets him so far apart from any other action director working in India and yet goes so subtly unnoticed, is his ability to set up an action scene with stakes and geography. And when I talk about geography, I'm not referring to the name of the city where the action scene is happening, but rather the spatial relationship of the characters to each other and the environment that they're in. So often, modern directors and blockbusters are completely ignoring the geography of the scene, and action scenes keep getting bigger and bigger while the audience is confused where the characters are in relationship to each other or what the stakes are, which results in reactions like these.
We are so
I'm
high
so lost.
and going so fast.
What is going on? This is progressive.
Wait, is this real?
So often movies just start action scenes without even establishing what the stakes are and just jump into the action. But what's so great about Rajamouli is that he follows the rules of cinema and filmmaking so closely that it allows him to create a completely tight action set piece without having to guess what he has to do to make it coherent. So let's take a look at how S.S. Rajamouli sets up an action scene. The bridge train accident scene is a 7-minute masterclass in making sure your audience knows what the geography of the scene is and what the stakes are. And more than anything, this reminds me of the way Mission Impossible sets up an action scene with expository dialogue.
Intel indicates she will check into the Burj Hotel in Dubai in 36 hours.
But since Rajamouli is even better, he does all of that visually. See how everything is set up without the use of dialogue. Rajamouli brilliantly uses this drone shot to set up the bird's eye view of the location so that the audience knows the entire layout of the scene. But this also establishes the direction of camera movement. Notice how the camera is going from behind the bridge on its left side to its right side. So it can follow something called the 180-degree rule, which is basically drawing a straight line between the two main characters and making sure that the camera is only on one side of them. Notice how the camera no longer shifts over to the other side of the bridge until the line between them also shifts. This grounds the audience's sense of direction, since we know which side we're facing at all times and which side the action is going to happen. Ram is always moving from screen left to screen right, and Bhim is always moving from screen right to screen left. The camera never flips to the other side to confuse our sense of direction of movement. And when it comes to scenes like this, even big directors like Michael Bay forget this rule of filmmaking and end up making a disorienting piece of action. Rajamouli always makes sure that the spatial relationships are always clear to the audience. This lateral shot moves from what seems to be a real shot to CGI to a real shot again, just to establish spatially where Ram is in relationship to Bhim.
Geography is one of the most important things to me, so the audience isn't thrown into chaos trying to figure out the story you're telling. The audience needs to be clearer than you. I can create suspense if the audience knows where all the players are and they know what the stakes are. The suspense of that sequence is letting the audience know geographically where everybody is at all times.
Also, there's a rule in filmmaking called Chekhov's gun that states if in the first act you've hung a pistol on the wall, then in the following one it should be fired. Otherwise, don't put it there. Nothing in a Rajamouli film comes out of the blue. Everything always has a setup, reminder, and payoff. So even a small detail like the flag or the fisher boy is set up and reminded before it comes into play. The fisher boy could have just as easily been already on the river fishing when the scene starts, especially in the hands of a lesser director. But Rajamouli follows the rules of thirds when it comes to Chekhov's gun. You set it up, you give the audience a reminder, and then you bring it into play. Setup, reminder, payoff. Setup, reminder, payoff. Setup, reminder, payoff. The more you follow this rule, the better the emotional reaction that you get from the audience. The other part of Rajamouli's action scene is that he doesn't do anything with dialogue that can be done with visuals. Much of his setting up of action scenes is to raise the stakes of the scene without any dialogue. And a huge part of blockbuster these days is that directors think bigger stakes are created by making the action bigger. Whereas stakes are much bigger for the audience when they can understand how much danger the characters are in at all times and what the obstacles are that they have to overcome. The more clarity you can give the audience about all the variables means the greater tension that you can build up and elicit a bigger release when the characters are out of danger. So to take a recap of how to raise the stakes and set up an action scene, number 1, make sure that the audience knows the layout of the space the scene is happening in. There's no use in increasing the amount of action if the audience is still trying to figure out where all of this is happening. Number 2, make sure that the audience knows the spatial relationships of the character to each other and the danger at all times. This increases our state of tension knowing how close the characters are to danger at every moment. Number 3, make sure that the direction of movement is always respected. The audience should never feel confused about which direction the characters are facing or moving at all times. Number 4, use the rule of thirds to set up all the variables in advance wherever you can. Everything should have a setup and a reminder before it becomes part of the action. Watching Rajamouli follow these rules and many more that maybe we don't even know about makes us realize it's great to have a well executed action scene that's really cool, but the emotional reaction of your audience is on a whole another level when your action scene has a setup, reminder, and payoff. Almost like you have to load and aim before you can shoot.
And the reason why we feel those action sequences are so incredible is because the emotion that's built up before. If I want an action sequence, there has to be a reason, an emotional reason for that action sequence to happen on screen.